Alright guys, so talking about ellipses, we need to know certain parts of the ellipse. So first of all, every ellipse is going to have a center, just like the circle. The ellipse has this right here. This is going to be called the major axis. The reason it's the major axis, it's whichever way it's longer. So if it's, I can see obviously it's longer in the x direction, so that's going to be my major axis. This right here that goes through the center, this is going to be called the minor axis. These points are going to be called the minor axis. So the minor axis is going to have endpoints. So these are going to be the minor axis endpoints. And the major axis is going to have endpoints. So these points, of course, are called the major axis endpoints. On this major axis, we're going to have these other points that are called foci. So this is going to be a foci. It's actually, like, both of them together are called foci. If I talk about one, it's called a focus. So both of those two together would be called foci. All right, so again, whichever way it's longer, that's called the major axis endpoints. Whichever way it's smaller, that's called the minor axis endpoints. The two foci must lie on the major axis, and then it has a center. All right, so this is going to tell you how to do everything, but I am just going to kind of go through and explain it with examples because it makes it a lot easier to understand. So you can go back and read this if you'd like. Here is an important thing, though. To find this c value, we have to do a squared minus b squared equals c squared. These foci right here, the foci are c units from the center. So the foci are c units from the center. And to find c, we have to do a squared minus b squared equals c squared. Notice that the form for the ellipse, what does it always have to be equal to? 1. So to make this equal to 1, I'm going to have to divide each term by 9. So I'm going to divide by 9. So now I have x squared over 9 plus y squared over 1 equals 1. Here are the things that I'm going to have to find. The first thing I'm going to find are going to be the major axis endpoints. But before I find that, actually, let's squeeze in here the center. We need to know the center first. What's the center here, guys? Just what you would think with a circle. What's the center? 0, 0. There's no change, right? There's no h, there's no k, so the center is a 0, 0. So let's go ahead and plot that. So our center's right there, 0, 0. When we look at this number, if we take the square root of it, that tells us how far to go out in the x direction. So how far are we going to go out in the x direction? 3. So I go over 3 to the right, and I go over 3 to the left. Those are going to be my major axis endpoints because this number's higher than that. So it's going to be longer in the x direction. So my major axis endpoints are 3, 0, and negative 3, 0. The square root of, yeah. Because it's the square root of 9. The square root of this number is going to tell us how far to go out in the y direction. So how far are we going to go out in the y direction? 1. So I'm going to go up 1, down 1. What do you think those are called then? Minor axis endpoints. So those are going to be at 0, 1, 0, negative 1. So now I just connect those dots to create the ellipse. There's the ellipse. The other thing I'm going to have to find are the foci. To do that, I have to do a squared minus b squared equals c squared. Looking at the formula, a squared and b squared are these numbers on the bottom. A is always the larger one. So in this case, a squared is 9, b squared is 1. I'm going to find c squared. 9 minus 1 is 8. I take the square root, and c equals 2 radical 2. So I have to go that direction in the way it's longer, because the foci are always on the major axis. So I'm going to go out that far in the x direction. So my foci then are going to be at 2 radical 2, 0, and negative 2 radical 2, 0. Radical 8 is about 2.7, so I'm going to go out that far. And those would be the foci. Any questions? Yeah, on the
first cube equation, the A and B are switched, but then not at all.
Yes, it's going to make it go longer in the y direction if they had been switched. Yeah. Because it tells us in the formula that a squared, that these are already squared. Okay, see the square root of this is actually a. So that's how I knew how far to go out. So the square root of this is 3. So that was my a value. So I had to go out 3. So a squared, 3 squared is 9. Any other questions? All right, let's do another example. It'll make more sense the more you see it. All right, so letter B, taking it up a little bit more difficult, the center on this one. McKenna, nicely, can you tell me the center? Good. Just like a circle. So we're going to go to 1, negative 3. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to find our major axis endpoints. We'll just put end for endpoints. All right, now we have to identify which way it's going to be longer. Chloe, which way is it going to be longer, x or y? Y. And how far out am I going to go in the y direction? It's the square root of this number. So I'm going to go up 6 from my center. And I'm going to go down 6. We'll just go right into that other graph. How far are we going to go in the x direction? Well, let's go ahead and write down those points. So those points are going to be 1, negative 9, and 1, 3. I went down 6 and up 6 in the y direction. Now we're going to find the minor axis endpoints. Okay, what are we going to do on this? Kara, how far am I going to go out?
5 units left and right.
Good. So from the center, I go out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that's going to put me at negative 4, negative 3, and 6, negative 3. So now I'm going to try to make a somewhat pretty ellipse. It's kind of hard to do up here, but I won't grade you on the attractiveness of your ellipse. So, McKinley?
How do you know to fill out the side?
It's always the square root. Yep, square root of this number 5, square root of that number 6. So I go out 5 in x, 6 in y. All right, so there's my ellipse. So now I'm going to have to find my foci. To find my foci, it's always a squared minus b squared equals c squared. Remember, these numbers are already squared. So this is going to be my a squared. The larger one must be a squared because I'm going to have to subtract. So it has to be the larger one. Minus b squared equals c squared. 36 minus 25 is 11. Take the square root. And so c is going to equal 11, square root of 11. So am I going to go up and down square root of 11 or left and right square root of 11? Up and down, right. It has to be on my major axis in the longer direction. Square root of 11 is what, about 3.4? I don't have to do anything with that. So there's my foci. So what I did was x didn't change, but for the y, I had to add radical 11. Again, x didn't change, but from the y, I had to go down radical 11. And those are all the important parts we need for an ellipse. Questions on that one? All right. On the next one, we have to complete the square, like we did with the circles. Okay, so here's what we do. Everything that has an x, we have to get it together. Anything that has a y has to be put together. The constant we always take over to the other side. Now before you can complete the square, you have to factor out a 16 out of these two. Not a 16x, just a 16. So you factor out a 16 and you're left with x squared plus 6x plus blank. I'm just going to leave it open. Out of these two, I have to factor out a 4. So I've got 4, and then y squared minus 2y plus a blank. And now we have to complete the square. That's where we look at this. We take half and square it. That's 9. But I really didn't just add on 9. I added on a 16 times 9 because there's a 16 in front of here. 16 times 9 is 144, so I really added on 144 right there. I take half of this. Half of negative 2 is negative 1. Squared is 1. But I really didn't just add on 1. What did we add on? We really added on 4, so I have to add on 4. And so when I add all of those together, I get 64. I'm going to go ahead and factor this. This will be x plus 3 squared. This will be y minus 1 squared. Now, what do we have to have over here on the right side, though? 1. So I have to divide this by 64, this by 64, and this by 64. So now I'm going to have x plus 3 squared. What's 64 divided by 16? 4 plus y minus 1. 64 divided by 4 is 16. And now I have it into the correct form. Questions on how I did that part? So now we're going to state the center. Ben, Malik, what's the center? I'm going to go ahead and plot that. Okay, how far am I going to go out in the x direction, Dan? Square root of that. Go out 2 in the x direction. Lexi, how far am I going to go out in the y direction? So I'm going to go up 4 and down 4. I should be putting these points as I go. Okay, let's go ahead and let's do lowercase, M-A-E lowercase. So what would it make sense to call it if I'm going to use capitals or lowercase? These are going to represent, lower ones would be the minor axis endpoints, capitals or major axis endpoints. You can use that abbreviation if you want to save a little time. So here were my minor axis endpoints. I went out 2 in the x direction. My major axis endpoints, I went out 4 in the y direction. Go ahead and make my somewhat pretty ellipse here. Let's see. Make it there, it's not bad. Okay, to find my foci, I have to do, I'm going to come over here, I have to do a squared minus b squared equals c squared. Do you see how my a squared has to be 16 because that's a larger number? okay? And that's going to give me 12. I take the square root. 4 times 3, that's 2 radical 3 for C. Am I going to go out 2 radical 3 in the x direction or the y direction, Evan? Y direction. And square root of 12 is about 3.5. So I'm going to go up 3.5, and I'm going to go down 3.5. There's my foci. I had to do that in the y direction, so my x doesn't change, but from that y, I had to go up 2 radical 3, and from that y, I had to go down radical 3. And there's all the important information. Yes? The focus is actually how it's created. If I had a piece of string and I had you put your fingers here and here on the focus, and I took that string and I pulled it, it would create an ellipse if your fingers were holding the ends of the string at those focal points. And we just don't have time to do that today, but we'll do it and I'll show you. But that's where the foci always would lie. Okay. All right, letter D. Okay, letter D. Notice on this one it's already equal to 1. But guys, there's another rule that we haven't talked about, and that's that these coefficients also have to be 1. So to make these be 1, here's the way I have to think of this. This is over 1 right now. This is over 1 right now. This in front of the x squared has to be a 1. So what I have to do is divide this by 4 and divide the bottom by 4. I'm allowed to do that. Divide the numerator by 4 and the denominator by 4. So now I've got x squared over 1/4 plus. Now what should I do with this one? Divide the top and the bottom by 9. So I divide the top by 9 and the bottom by 9. So now I'm going to have y squared over 1/9. All right, so this is kind of interesting. The center is going to be at 0, 0. How far am I going to go out in the x direction? Ben? No, square root of 1, square root of 4. 1/2, right? So I'm going to go out 1/2 in the x direction. Grace, how far am I going to go out in the y direction? No, you got to take the square root in the y direction. What's the square root of 1? Square root of 9. 1/3. So I have to go out 1/3 up, 1/3 down. Which one's larger, 1/4 or 1/9? 1/4. So those are going to be my major axis endpoints at 1/2, 0 and -1/2, 0. My minor axis endpoints are going to be at 0, 1/3 and 0, -1/3. This is a teeny tiny little ellipse. Oh. Good enough. To find my foci, I have to do a squared minus b squared. We said this is larger, so I'm going to have to do 1/4 minus 1/9 equals c squared. You can solve this however you want, but I'm going to multiply through by the common denominator of 36 to eliminate my fractions. So I'm going to get 9 minus 4 equals 36c squared. 5 equals 36c squared. Divide by 36. C is going to be, when I take the square root of 5, I can't do. Square root of 36 is 6. So there's how far out I would have to go in the x direction. So my foci are going to be positive 5 radical 5 over 6, 0, and negative radical 5 over 6, 0. Those are going to be the foci. And it's so tiny, I'm just going to guess there. Those are the foci. All right, questions? Okay, guys, so I gave you a worksheet already. I want you to work on that over the weekend. I will put the answers on Canvas. And here's the reason why. It's really important that that you do them correctly from the